On a Tuesday morning in October of 2004, the Harlan County Water Authority had a problem. A 10-inch cast iron main. Sawmill Road. Late in 1953. It was leaking. Not a burst, not a blowout, nothing dramatic. Just a quiet, steady loss. 38,000 gallons a day, disappearing into the earth without a sound, without a puddle, without a single sign on the surface that anything was wrong. Just numbers on a meter that didn't add up. The pipe was underground, the leak was underground, and the records that were supposed to show exactly where both of them were? Wrong. Welcome back to the channel, and if you're new here, hit that subscribe button and leave a like. It helps more than you know. Now let's get into it. There is a file cabinet in the Harlan County Water Authority office on Cumberland Avenue that contains every as-built drawing the department has ever produced. 43 years of pipe installations, mains and laterals, valve stations and hydrant runs. Every record, every survey, every hand-drawn schematic going back to the early 1950s. Filed, indexed, and in the newer folders, digitized into a GIS database that can put the entire Harlan County water network on a laptop screen in under 10 seconds. The system is precise, confident, color-coded by pipe diameter, by material, by year of installation. It is also, in places, completely wrong. Not wrong because someone made a careless error. Not wrong because the engineers didn't do their jobs. Wrong because of something far simpler and far harder to fix. The ground changed, and the records didn't. The 10-inch cast iron main running along Sawmill Road was laid in the summer of 1953. The crew that laid it was working from surveyor's stakes. Those stakes were set from the Sawmill Road centerline. A centerline that made perfect sense in 1953, before the county rerouted the road in 1971 to straighten a curve near the Briggs property. When the road moved, the centerline moved with it. The pipe stayed exactly where it had always been, and the as-built drawings, which recorded the pipe's position relative to the original centerline, were never updated to reflect the new one. Nobody flagged it. Nobody corrected it. The foreman who oversaw the 1953 installation retired in 1968. The engineer who signed the drawings died in 1979. The county crew that rerouted the road in 1971 was a highway department crew, not a water department crew, and they had no reason to pull water infrastructure records before they moved a road centerline. So the GIS map, in the fall of 2004, showed the Sawmill Road main running 20 feet east of the road centerline. The pipe was not 20 feet east of the road centerline. Nobody knew exactly where it was. Somewhere in a 35-foot corridor of clay subsoil and limestone shelf and decades of settled ground. Somewhere between the road shoulder and Walt Briggs's fence line. Out there, underground, invisible. And it was bleeding. 38,000 gallons a day. Not a rupture. Not a catastrophic failure that announced itself with a geyser and a sinkhole. Just a crack, quiet, patient, invisible, weeping water into the earth at a rate the system meters caught only as a number that didn't reconcile at the end of the billing cycle. The map said 20 feet. The pipe disagreed. And on a Tuesday morning in October of 2004, the Harlan County Water Authority sent a young man named Ryan Calloway out to Sawmill Road to settle the argument. He brought a $14,000 machine. He was going to need more than that. Ryan Calloway had never lost a pipe. That was the thing about him. And he would have been the first to tell you, not arrogantly, just matter-of-factly, the way a man states a thing he considers settled. 2 years with the Harlan County Water Authority. 18 months running field locations. Every pipe he'd been sent to find, he'd found. The machine found it. That was the point of the machine. He was 31 years old. He had a degree in civil engineering technology from Eastern Kentucky University, a GIS certification from the state, and a genuine, unironic belief that the gap between the old way of doing things and the right way of doing things was exactly the width of a good instrument and the training to use it. The old-timers at the department told stories. Crews from the 70s and 80s, walking road shoulders with nothing but a clipboard and a feeling, digging 3 test holes before they found the pipe, losing a full day to a bad drawing and a worse guess. Ryan listened to those stories the way young men listen to stories about hardship that no longer applies, with polite interest and a private certainty that none of that was ever going to happen to him. He pulled the county truck onto the Sawmill Road shoulder at 7:50 in the morning, drank the last of his coffee, and unloaded the rigid SeekTech LE24 electromagnetic pipe locator from the bed. $14,000 of ground-penetrating signal technology. He'd been trained on it for 2 days in Lexington. He trusted it the way you trust something you paid $14,000 for. He ran the first pass at 8:10. The reading put the main at 16 feet east of center. He noted it, figured the angle of approach had been slightly off, and ran the pass again, 24 feet. He stopped walking, looked at the screen, recalibrated the transmitter frequency, the way the training manual said to do when readings were inconsistent. Started the third pass from the south valve station. 11 feet. He stood in the road shoulder for a moment with the locator in his hand and did the thing that confident men do when a tool fails them. He decided the tool wasn't the problem. Operator error, maybe. Signal bounce off the asphalt. He'd run one more pass, clean and careful, and the reading would sort itself out. The fourth pass gave him nothing he could use. The signal was fractured across a 12-foot band, scattered by something in the corridor he couldn't isolate. He'd find out later it was a gas line running parallel to the main, a corroded telephone conduit from a 1967 road project, and a clay drainage tile cutting diagonally underneath both of them. 3 buried utilities, none of them water, all of them metallic enough to strangle the signal he was trying to read. 4 passes. 4 different answers. Ryan Calloway stood next to his county truck on Sawmill Road and looked at a machine that had never failed him before. It had failed him now. And he had no idea that 60 yards up the road, an old man at a fence post had been watching the whole thing, and had known since the second pass exactly where the pipe was. Ryan called his supervisor at 9:47 in the morning. He didn't lead with the 4 failed passes. He led with the interference, the gas line, the conduit, the drainage tile, because that framed it correctly. The machine hadn't failed. The conditions had beaten the machine. There was a difference, and Ryan felt that difference mattered, even standing alone on a road shoulder with nobody around to hear him make it. His supervisor, Dale Morrow, had been with the Water Authority for 19 years. He listened without interrupting. When Ryan finished, Dale asked one question. "How bad is the loss?" 38,000 gallons a day, Ryan said. Dale was quiet for a moment. Then he said he'd call Precision Underground out of Lexington. They were the contracted locating service the county used when in-house equipment couldn't get the job done. Good crew. Reliable equipment. Not cheap. Ryan asked how soon they could come. Dale called back 11 minutes later. Thursday. Not Wednesday. Thursday. 48 hours away, minimum. Because Precision Underground had a crew committed to a pipeline project in Breathitt County through the end of Wednesday and couldn't release them before Thursday morning at the earliest. The rate was $200 an hour. 4-hour minimum on any call, regardless of how long the job actually took. $800 to walk onto the site before a single piece of equipment came out of the truck. Ryan did the math, standing next to his truck on Sawmill Road, because there was nothing else to do. 38,000 gallons a day. At the county's current bulk water rate, that was $285 in lost revenue every 24 hours. 2 days of waiting, Tuesday into Wednesday into Thursday morning, was $570 in water that had already left the system and was never coming back. Add the $800 minimum for Precision Underground, and the county was looking at $1,370 to locate a pipe that was somewhere within 35 feet of where the record said it was. $1,370 to find something that was already there, that had always been there. That would still be there on Thursday, when the crew from Lexington finally pulled onto Sawmill Road with their equipment and their hourly rate and their 4-hour minimum. Ryan leaned against the side of his truck. The machine was in the bed behind him. $14,000 of electromagnetic signal technology that had given him 4 different answers and then quit making sense entirely. The GIS map was open on his laptop on the passenger seat. showing the main at 20 feet east of center with the quiet confidence of a document that had never been wrong in its own estimation. Thursday felt far away. The meter back at the pump station was still spinning. And somewhere in 35 feet of Kentucky clay, a 10-inch cast iron pipe was bleeding the system dry 1 gallon at a time, patient and invisible, completely indifferent to the cost. Walt Briggs had been at the fence post since 8 o'clock. Not watching the way a man watches something that surprises him. Watching the way a man watches something he already understands. With patience and a quiet that comes not from disinterest but from already knowing how it ends. He was 74 years old. Lean in the way that men who have worked land their whole lives go lean. Not thin, but stripped down, nothing left that doesn't have a purpose. He wore the same things he wore every morning. Denim overalls, a flannel shirt the color of old rust, work boots that had been resoled twice and would be resoled again before he let them go. His hands rested on the top rail of the fence the way hands rest on something they have touched 10,000 times. He'd farmed this ground since 1970. 140 acres on the east side of Sawmill Road. Cattle, hay, a small tobacco allotment, the kind of mixed operation that Harlan County had run for generations and would keep running long after the economists finished explaining why it didn't make sense. His fence line ran parallel to the road for a quarter mile. The Sawmill Road water main, the one Ryan Calloway was out there failing to find, ran along that fence line. Walt's property, Walt's fence, Walt's ground. He knew every foot of it. He knew where the limestone shelf pushed up close to the surface near the north end of the run, and where the clay went deep and soft near the drainage low spot at the south end. He knew where the soil changed color after a hard rain, and where it stayed dry when everything around it was wet. He knew this ground the way you know something you have walked every season for 34 years. And he knew where the pipe was. He'd known since the first pass. Walt's grandfather, Earl Briggs, had been the finest water witch in Harlan County, maybe in the whole of southeastern Kentucky. Between 1918 and 1950, Earl had located springs and underground water veins for 90 wells across 4 counties. The well drillers who kept records put his success rate at 84%. 84 wells out of 100 hit water exactly where Earl pointed his stick. In a region where the geology was complicated and the alternative was drilling test holes at random, Earl Briggs was the most valuable man a farmer could call. Earl had taught Walt the way he himself had been taught. Not in a classroom, not from a book, but in the field, hand over hand. The knowledge passing between them the way it had always passed in families like theirs. Walt was 12 years old the first time he felt the stick pull. He never forgot it. 62 years of practice since that morning. He had cut today's stick before breakfast, a fresh, Y-shaped branch from the peach tree at the corner of his yard, the same tree he had been cutting sticks from for decades. Green wood, bark on, flexible but firm. He'd trimmed the leaf nodes with his pocket knife and leaned it against the fence post while he drank his coffee and watched Ryan Calloway pull onto the road shoulder in the county truck. He'd watched the first pass, watched the second, watched Ryan stop and recalibrate and try again and get nothing he could use. By the third pass, Walt had already stopped watching the machine. He was watching Ryan. Watching the way a man watches someone working very hard at the wrong thing. Not with contempt, not with impatience, but with the particular stillness of someone who is waiting for the moment when the right thing becomes necessary. That moment, Walt knew, was coming soon. He picked up the stick from where it leaned against the post. And he waited. Walt didn't call out. He didn't wave. He just opened the gate at the end of the fence line and walked through it onto the road shoulder, the forked stick held loosely at his side, and stopped about 10 feet from where Ryan was standing. Ryan saw him and straightened up off the truck. He registered the overalls, the flannel shirt, the work boots. He registered the age, mid-70s, maybe older. And then he registered the stick, and something happened in his face that he probably wasn't aware of. Not mockery, not cruelty. Just the involuntary expression of a man whose brain has pattern-matched something into a category labeled folklore. A quick softening around the eyes, a slight pull at the corner of the mouth. He laughed, genuinely. Briefly. The laugh of a man who has been trained by his education and his profession and his generation to find something funny without quite being able to stop himself. Walt had seen that laugh before. He'd been seeing it off and on for about 40 years. He waited for it to finish. "You at the water department?" Walt said. Ryan composed himself. "Yes, sir." Ryan Calloway, field technician. Walt nodded at the locator in Ryan's hand. "That thing finding anything?" Ryan looked down at the machine. "Working through some interference," he said. "We've got multiple utilities in the corridor. It's making it hard to isolate the main signal." Walt nodded slowly, the way a man nods when he is being polite about an answer that doesn't quite cover the situation. "I can find it," Walt said. Ryan looked at him, then at the stick, then back at him. "Son," he said, and then stopped, because he realized mid-sentence that he was about to say something that might not land well to a man 40 years his senior. He reset. He said it anyway, but more carefully. "That is a stick. It's a dowsing rod," Walt said. "My grandfather found water for 90 wells in this county with one of these. I've been using them since I was 12. I've found 3 buried pipes on this property alone, and a spring that's been feeding my south pasture since 1985. He paused. "The main you're looking for runs along my fence line, my ground. I've walked it every season for 30 years. Ryan stood with $14,000 of electromagnetic equipment in his hand and looked at a forked peach branch. He thought about Thursday. He thought about $800 minimum and 48 hours of the meter spinning and 38,000 gallons a day going into the clay. "You really think that works?" he said. Walt looked at him with the patience of a man who has never needed anyone else to believe in order to do the thing. "I think it already does," he said. Ryan was quiet for a moment. There was nothing else to try. Thursday was 2 days away. The machine had given him 4 answers and none of them were right. And this man had farmed the ground above that pipe for 34 years. He gestured toward the road shoulder. "Go ahead," he said. Walt nodded once. He adjusted his grip on the stick, palms up, one arm of the Y in each hand, the stem pointing forward. Wrists rotated slightly outward to put the wood under tension. The same grip Earl Briggs had put his 12-year-old hands into 62 years ago on a hillside in Harlan County. He started walking, 6-inch steps, slow and steady. His eyes on the ground ahead, not searching for something invisible, but reading what the surface was telling him. The slight depression in the soil where decades of trench settlement had pulled the ground down a fraction of an inch. The faint strip of darker grass that follows a buried water line the way a shadow follows a body. Ryan watched him, and for the first time all morning, he didn't have anything to say. Walt walked the first pass 30 feet east of the road centerline. Nothing. The stick was neutral. No pull, no response, the green wood holding steady in his hands the way it did when there was nothing beneath him worth reading. He turned and walked a parallel line 10 feet closer to the road. Still nothing. A third pass, 10 feet closer again. The stick stayed flat and quiet. Ryan was leaning against the truck watching. He had his arms crossed the way men cross their arms when they are trying to look neutral about something they have already made a judgment about. He didn't say anything. Walt hadn't asked him to. The fourth pass was 14 feet from the road centerline. Walt was 6 steps into it when the stick moved. Not a tremble. Not an ambiguous dip that could have been his wrists shifting, or his grip loosening, or the wood responding to something other than what he knew it was responding to. The stem pulled downward with a firmness that heaved simultaneously in both wrists, a clean, definite force, like a hand, pressing on the end of the branch from below. The green wood bent against his grip. The pull held as he kept walking, sustained and steady, centered on a band of ground approximately 2 feet wide, directly beneath his feet. He stopped. He had been walking for 4 minutes. "Here," Walt said. He wasn't loud about it. He said it the way a man states a fact that doesn't require emphasis. He pointed the stem of the stick at the ground between his boots. "The pipe is here. Running north to south, about 14 feet off center." He looked up at Ryan. "It's deeper than your map says. My guess is closer to 4 feet than the record shows." Ryan uncrossed his arms. He looked at the locator sitting on the hood of his truck. He looked at the ground where Walt was standing. He looked at Walt. Then, he picked up his radio and called for the backhoe. It arrived at 1:15 in the afternoon. The operator swung the bucket into position at Walt's mark, 14 feet east of the Sawmill Road centerline, and started digging. The first pass cut through topsoil, the second through clay. At 3 feet 11 inches, the bucket met resistance. The operator stopped, looked at Ryan. Ryan walked to the edge of the hole and looked down. Cast iron, 10 inches in diameter, running north to south, exactly as Walt had said, at 3 feet 11 inches of depth, 11 inches deeper than the county record showed, and 6 feet closer to the road than the GIS map had placed it. Ryan stood at the edge of that hole for a long moment. The machine had said 20 feet, 4 passes, 4 different answers, the best of them 20 feet. Walt had said 14, 1 pass, 4 minutes, 14 feet. The ground had said Walt. Ryan looked back down the road, shoulder to where the old man was standing quietly by the fence, the forked stick at his side, not waiting for a reaction, not needing one. Just present the way a man is present when he has known something for 62 years and has finally been given the ground to prove it. Ryan didn't say anything for a moment. There wasn't much to say. The pipe was exactly where the stick said it was. Ryan asked Walt if he would walk the rest of the run. He didn't frame it as a request exactly. It came out more like a man thinking out loud, half statement, half question. The words of someone whose certainty about how the morning was supposed to go had just been excavated out of the ground at 3 feet 11 inches, and he was still working out what that meant for the afternoon. Walt said yes. He'd been planning to anyway. He started at the North Valve Station and walked south. The same grip, the same pace, the same 6-inch steps he had been using since Earl Briggs first put a forked stick in his hands on a Harlan County hillside in 1954. The stick held steady at waist height. His eyes moved across the ground ahead of him, not looking for something he couldn't see, but reading what the surface offered. The way the grass lay, the way the soil had settled over 50 years of disturbed earth, the way the ground tells the truth about what is underneath it to anyone patient enough to ask. The pull was consistent from the start. A steady, firm downward pressure centered 13 to 15 feet east of the road centerline, sustained and even, the pressurized main announcing itself the same way for the first 900 feet of the run. Walt noted it, but didn't stop. Consistent pressure meant an intact pipe. He was looking for something different, something that didn't belong to the baseline. At 980 feet from the North Valve Station, he found it. The pull changed, not gradually, sharply, a sudden intensification that pressed the stick downward with a force noticeably greater than anything in the preceding 900 feet. Walt slowed his steps without stopping. The intensified pull held. He walked through it carefully, marking the edges of the zone in his mind, feeling where the pressure built and where it returned to baseline on the other side. 7 feet. The zone of intensification ran 7 feet along the corridor before the pull settled back to normal. He stopped at the center of it and turned to Ryan, who had been walking behind him at a respectful distance. "Your break is here," Walt said. He indicated the ground with the stem of the stick. "The soil under here is saturated. The water is coming up from the crack and spreading outward through the clay, maybe 3.5 feet in every direction. That gives you about 7 feet of pull zone on the surface. Your crack is somewhere in the middle of it." Ryan looked at the ground. It looked identical to every other foot of the corridor. Same grass, same surface, same nothing to indicate that anything was different about this particular patch of Kentucky earth. He called the backhoe back. The operator positioned the bucket at the center of Walt's marked zone and dug. Topsoil. Clay. More clay. Darker now. Heavier, the kind of density that comes from saturation. Soil that has been drinking water for longer than anyone realized. At 4 feet 2 inches, the bucket found the pipe. And on the underside of the pipe, running along the bottom seam for 5 inches, was the crack. Not dramatic. Not the kind of failure that announces itself. A 5-inch split in the cast iron, pressed into the earth, weeping water into the surrounding clay at a rate that had been bleeding the system for weeks. The clay around it was saturated dark and soft for 3.5 feet in every direction. 3.5 feet on each side. 7 feet total. Walt's zone had been exact. The repair crew clamped the crack with a stainless steel sleeve. It took 2 hours once the pipe was exposed. Clean work, straightforward. The kind of repair that is simple when you know where to dig and nearly impossible when you don't. By 4:45 in the afternoon, the clamp was seated, the trench was being backfilled, and the 38,000 gallons a day that had been disappearing into the ground were moving through the system again. Ryan stood at the edge of the filled trench and looked down the road shoulder to where Walt was walking back toward his fence line, the stick at his side, unhurried, the same way he had come. The machine had never found the pipe. Walt had found the pipe, walked the full run, pinpointed the leak to a 7-foot zone, and been exact on every count, with a forked branch from a peach tree he had cut before breakfast. Ryan watched him go and didn't say anything. There wasn't a category for this in his training. There wasn't a box on the field report form where you wrote down what had just happened. There was only the filled trench and the repaired pipe and the meter back at the pump station that had finally, after weeks of spinning, settled into a number that made sense. He picked up his locator from the hood of the truck. He put it in the bed. He drove back to the office with a lot more silence than he'd left with that morning. Ryan told the story the next morning in the department parking lot before the 8 o'clock briefing. He didn't plan to. It came out the way things come out when you've been turning something over in your mind for 16 hours and you finally find yourself standing in front of people who will understand the weight of it. He started with the 4 failed passes. He went through the math, the 38,000 gallons, the Thursday appointment, the $1,370 sitting on the clock. And then he told them about Walt Briggs walking through the gate with a forked peach branch and finding the pipe in 4 minutes after the SeekTech LE-24 had failed for most of a morning. The parking lot split like a seam coming apart. The veterans nodded, not dramatically, just the slow, particular nod of men who have stored a piece of information and are now watching it confirmed. Dale Morrow, who had 19 years with the authority, said he'd heard the name Walt Briggs before. His predecessor had mentioned him once, years ago, in the context of exactly this kind of situation. Jimmy Hale, 23 years, said his father had known Earl Briggs, Walt's grandfather, and that Earl had located the spring that still fed the Hale family property to this day. These men didn't find the story surprising. They found it familiar. The younger techs were a different matter. Marcus Webb, 26, 2 years out of the University of Kentucky with a degree in environmental engineering, said what the younger half of the parking lot was thinking. He said it carefully, because Ryan was his senior and he respected that, but he said it. There were controlled studies, he pointed out, double-blind trials going back decades, dowsers tested under rigorous conditions, without terrain cues, without prior knowledge of pipe locations. The results were consistent. Performance at chance level. No better than random selection. No proposed mechanism that held up to physical scrutiny. What Ryan had witnessed, Marcus suggested, was a man with 60 years of ground knowledge, making educated inferences and using the stick as a delivery system for conclusions he'd already reached through observation. Ryan listened to all of it. Then he said, "I had the same training you did. I read the same studies. I stood on that road shoulder and watched an old man with a piece of fruit tree find a pipe my $14,000 machine couldn't locate in 4 hours. Then he walked 1,200 feet and marked a 7-foot saturation zone around a 5-inch crack at 4 feet 2 inches of depth. Every number was right. Every single one." He paused. "You tell me what to call it. I don't care what we call it. I care that the pipe is fixed and the meter is right, and we didn't spend $800 on a crew from Lexington." The department director, Gary Fitch, had been standing at the edge of the group listening without speaking. Fitch had run pipe crews for 20 years before moving into administration. He had seen equipment fail in conditions it wasn't designed for. He had seen experienced men solve problems that instruments couldn't. He was not a man who confused explanation with evidence. He told Ryan to put Walt Briggs on the supplemental contact list, not as a contractor, not as a vendor, not as anything the department's procurement policy would need to process or justify or put out to competitive bid. Just a name, A phone number. A neighbor with a skill the department couldn't replicate, couldn't explain, and, Fitch said this plainly looking at Marcus Webb when he said it, couldn't afford to dismiss. Marcus Webb didn't argue with Gary Fitch. Nobody did. Walt Briggs went on the list that afternoon. The Harlan County Water Authority called Walt Briggs 9 times between 2004 and 2007. Not for every job. The SeekTech LE-24 still went out first, every time, because that was the right way to do it, and Ryan Calloway was not a man who abandoned a method just because it had failed him once. The machine worked in clean corridors. It worked in open fields away from interference. It worked the way it was designed to work when the conditions allowed it to. But Harlan County had a lot of corridors that weren't clean. A lot of road shoulders layered with decades of buried utility work, gas lines and phone conduits and abandoned drainage infrastructure crossing and recrossing each other in the clay like the inside of a wall that nobody had ever mapped completely. In those corridors, when the machine scattered and the readings stopped making sense, Ryan picked up the phone and called Walt. 9 calls. 9 sites where the electronics had failed and the geometry was wrong and Thursday was too far away. Walt found the pipe within 10 inches of his mark every time. Every single time, across 9 different locations, in 3 years of being the resource the department couldn't explain and couldn't do without. He found 6 leaks inside his marked zones without exception. The saturation bands he identified on the surface corresponded to the actual spread of groundwater around each crack or joint failure, with an accuracy that the department's acoustic leak detection equipment, on the 2 occasions they tried it in the same corridors, couldn't match. The avoided contractor costs across 9 calls came to $6,300. Walt's total compensation for all 9? Nothing. He wouldn't take it. He said what he'd always said, which was that finding water was not a service he performed for money. It was a thing he knew how to do. You used it when it was needed, and you didn't attach a price to it, because the moment you did became something different from what it was. He doused for the Water Authority until he was 79 years old. His knees ended it. Not his hands, not his eyes, not the 65 years of accumulated knowledge that lived in his wrists and his feet and his quiet reading of ground that had been his ground for most of his adult life. The knees just couldn't take the road shoulder anymore. The uneven terrain, the slow, careful walking that the work required. He handed Ryan a fresh-cut stick from the peach tree in his yard and told him to come back in the spring for another one. Walt Briggs died in March of 2013. He was 83 years old. The peach tree still stands in the yard of the Briggs farm on Sawmill Road. His grandson Cole farms the 140 acres now. Cattle, hay, the same operation Walt ran, the same ground Earl Briggs walked before either of them was born. Cole douses. Walt taught him the same way Earl taught Walt. Hand over hand, field by field, the knowledge moving between them the way it had always moved in that family, without ceremony and without documentation, and without any particular concern for whether anyone outside the family considered it legitimate. Ryan Calloway is the Harlan County Water Authority's senior field supervisor. He has been with the department for 22 years. He runs a crew of 4 technicians, all of them younger than he was when he pulled onto Sawmill Road on that Tuesday morning in October of 2004 with a machine he trusted completely and a problem it couldn't solve. He carries a rigid SeekTech LE-24 in his truck. It is the best electromagnetic pipe locator on the market, and he knows how to use it. And he trusts it in the conditions it was designed for. He also carries a forked peach stick. Cut every spring from Walt's tree with Cole's permission. Green wood, bark on, Y-shaped, trimmed at the nodes with a pocket knife. The same stick, made new each year from the same tree, on the same farm, on the same road where an old man once walked 4 minutes and found what a machine spent a morning failing to locate. Ryan tells every new hire the same thing. He waits until they've had the full equipment training, until they understand the SeekTech and the GIS and the as-built records and every modern method the department uses. And then he shows them the stick. He says, "I still don't know how it works. I've read the studies that say it doesn't. I understand the physics argument, And I watched Walt Briggs find 9 pipes in 9 tries with a piece of fruit tree, and mark 6 leaks to within 7 feet, and never once be wrong. So I carry the stick. When the machine works, I use the machine. When the machine fails, I use the stick. And when someone asks me to explain it, he pauses there. He lets it sit for a moment, the way Walt used to let things sit. I tell them the pipe is where the stick says it is. That's always been enough. That's the story of Walt Briggs and Ryan Calloway and a 10-inch cast iron main on Sawmill Road that a $14,000 machine couldn't find, and a forked peach stick found in 4 minutes. If this one stayed with you, hit the like button. It tells us the story landed. Subscribe if you want more. We find these stories so you don't have to go looking for them. And leave a comment below. Do you believe the stick works? Or do you think Walt was reading the ground all along and the stick was just the way he delivered the answer? Either way, the pipe was where he said it was. We'll see you in the next one.